It's great, thank you. I hope to be a little bit provocative, not as provocative as Wanjiru. And believe me, when it comes to being provocative, I've learned from the very best. My 6-year-old daughter has a PhD in provocation, and the 4-year-old has a master's. And my wife describes them as being strong-willed. But if you were to ask me, I'd probably use much less magnanimous words, especially when the older one questions if I'm actually a real doctor, because she's never seen me in a hospital. So she doesn't understand how I can still claim to be one. But one day she'll understand what it is that I really do, and that is grant making. I work for a Canadian funding agency, and we fund a variety of issues, including climate change research and global health, which is my background. And prior to that, I was a public health researcher in Africa for many years. And in the course of what I do, I've come to recognize that there are deeply entrenched power imbalances in the discipline of global health. Global health practitioners and institutions in powerful countries generally occupy a position of privilege relative to their counterparts in less powerful countries. And as altruistic as many of us in global health believe that we are, and as much progress as we have made in global health on issues such as eradicating smallpox, largely bringing HIV and AIDS under control, these power imbalances are harmful, I believe, to a discipline that is meant to embody equity as its essence. And so I believe that the first and most important step towards tackling these power imbalances is for us to speak up about them. And that's why I didn't hesitate to attend and participate in this event. You see, as an African global health practitioner, I'm thankful to the field of global health. I can't deny that. I'm thankful for what it has done for my continent and for me as an individual. Some of the most fulfilling and meaningful partnerships and relationships that I've had in my professional career have been as a result of collaborating with global health practitioners, many of whom are in the global north or in powerful countries, as I prefer to frame it. And in fact, I earned my PhD right here in Amsterdam. And that experience just showed me the power of co-creation and the power of having a diverse group of people around the table who see each other as peers and as equals. And interestingly, at the time, yes, my colleagues in Amsterdam had a level of technical competency that I had not yet attained to at the time. But I had a much deeper understanding of the specific African context where we were implementing our research. And so I never felt like my context competency was valued any less than their technical competency. But I can't stand here and pretend that it's all been roses and fairies. There have been quite a number of harmful and regrettable practices. And to be more precise, what I'm trying to say is that the practice of global health and perhaps of international development in general is marred by a differential treatment of practitioners and institutions in less powerful countries, as Wanjiru alluded to. And I believe that it's this differential treatment and perhaps the institutionalization of this differential treatment through intersectional systems of sociopolitical injustices. That is what is being perceived by those of us in the global south as manifestations of coloniality in global health. And this differential treatment, it plays out in our minds as some kind of déjà vu, if you will. We know that our grandparents and their parents, when Jiku talked about her grandparent, we were treated differently or differentially by powerful countries. And now in the discipline of global health and of international development, so are we. The difference is that our grandparents were subjugated using guns, chains, and whips, while we are being subjugated using emails, Zoom calls, and grant proposals. And in this state of quasi-déjà vu, we perceive coloniality whenever researchers from powerful countries invade our countries, use us as data donkeys, and relegate us to the fine print in the acknowledgement section of their peer-reviewed publications, if we are even lucky. We perceive coloniality whenever funders and international donors, majority of which are domiciled in powerful countries, act as if they're doing us a favor while pretending not to know that there is an interdependent causative relationship between the wealth of their countries and the underdevelopment of ours. We perceive coloniality when curricula in leading public health schools fails to acknowledge the colonial history of global health, continues to minimize the lived experiences and expertise of people in less powerful countries, and also continues to churn out graduates who believe that Africa and the developing world needs to be rescued, and that they are the ones who can rescue us. And I have to say this: we perceive coloniality when a disease that affects us only becomes a global health priority when it affects you all. And I could go on and on. So there's no doubt in my mind that powerful countries have an oversized influence on global health. And we saw this oversized influence with the unequal distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, and we're even seeing it now with monkeypox. And in fact, it was around that period of what some people framed as vaccine apartheid that I personally started paying more serious attention to conversations on decolonizing global health. And I recognized immediately, as usual, African voices are or were largely underrepresented in these conversations. And so when the global health decolonization movement came calling, I didn't hesitate to become part of it. And we are on a mission to mobilize African voices to speak out about what we perceive as the manifestations of coloniality in global health. And one of the products of our efforts is a publication which is on our website, and it's entitled Pragmatic Approaches to Decolonizing Global Health in Africa. And in this document, we propose what we call common sense approaches to decolonizing global health. And we address different constituencies: funders, academic institutions, scientific journals, even the media, all complicit in perpetrating these power imbalances in global health. And so we address each of these constituencies and provide practical recommendations on what needs to change. For example, we point out to funders that it is crucial for them to examine who sits in their boards, who sits in scientific review panels. We remind them that what matters is not just who sits at the table, but on what terms. In other words, tokenism is simply not good enough. We raise the issue of epistemic injustice and how that remains deeply entrenched in global health academia. And we ask academics in powerful countries to make a deliberate effort to show higher regard for local and indigenous knowledge and expertise. We ask researchers in powerful countries to acknowledge their privileges and become true allies of researchers in less powerful countries. And on the issue of privilege, I know it's such a dirty word, but I think that is because it is misunderstood. We all have some kind of privilege: white versus black, men versus women, tall versus vertically challenged. We all have some level of privilege. But privilege is not about deserving what you have. It is really about the absence of impediment. And so when you have privilege, you really don't notice it. But when you do not have it, it pretty much affects everything that you do. For example, if you've never had to face the humiliation of applying for a visa to attend a scientific conference, then you'll never appreciate what it means to have passport privilege. You'll be like, what are these guys talking about? And generally the response to our guidelines has been quite encouraging. We've had several global health practitioners in powerful countries reaching out to pledge their allyship, and time will tell if they really mean it. But we acknowledge that our recommendations only scratch the surface, and that it will take much more to dismantle the socioeconomic and political structures that perpetuate these power asymmetries in the global health knowledge system. And we even know that not everyone, including some people in less powerful countries, agree with the use of the term decolonization. Not everyone is happy with that term. And some scholars have even accused of hijacking the term and turning it into a verb, right? And others keep screaming at us, decolonization is not a synonym for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We get it. Hold your horses. We get it, right? But we also know that it's impossible to find a framing that resonates with everyone. And that's why I strongly agree with Dr. Sheye Abimbola. He's the editor-in-chief of BMJ Global Health, who insists on what he calls a disciplined plurality when it comes to the issue of decolonizing global health. In other words, it is perfectly okay for us to have different positionalities on framing the issue. Overall, we acknowledge the many imperfections of our movement, but we are convinced that we must start somewhere. We must be vocal, we need to start to challenge the status quo, and we need to advocate for common sense at the bare minimum, And believe me, it's not easy being us. I personally have received some very interesting messages on social media. One person sent me a message on Twitter that said, and I quote, fundamentally, some adversarial decolonization frames, oppressor versus oppressed, are unnecessarily divisive and unlikely to gain broad support. Such approaches are unhelpful and ironically colonial. End of quote. So they ended up calling me the colonialist. There you go. And by the way, that's one of the nicer comments that I have received. But you know what? I'm speaking up because I honestly believe that most of us, from powerful and less powerful countries alike, are in the field of global health for good reasons. We want to save lives. We want to make a positive difference in the world. And so I'm hopeful that we all see these pragmatic calls for decolonization for what they are intended to be. They are not an attempt to demonize global health practitioners in the global north or in powerful countries. They are not an attempt to co-opt or diminish the contribution of true scholars to decolonization, such as Frantz Fanon and Anibal Quijano. And they are not intended to create a false dichotomy between practical and conceptual or philosophical approaches. We see these calls as a contribution to what must be a multifaceted approach to decolonizing knowledge systems in global health and beyond. And our hope is that our common sense approaches will inspire true reflection and perhaps an existential shift in consciousness that will enable all of us to strive towards more ethical and equitable knowledge partnerships. Thank you very much.